Farmers in India are stepping up the pressure on the government to repeal a set of laws they say will harm their livelihoods. Thousands gathered at a grain market outside the capital Delhi today in protest against these laws. And over the weekend, there was a massive rally in another town outside Delhi. Farmers believe the new laws introduced in September last year will leave them at the mercy of rich food companies. Farmers say these companies will use their power to dictate the price of agricultural products, and this will hurt their incomes. The protests have been on for nearly 10 months now, and there's warnings of even bigger ones to come.
Hundreds of thousands of farmers thronging the streets of Muzaffarnagar. In Uttar Pradesh, a largely agricultural state, anger at the government's new legislation runs particularly deep. On stage, their leaders reaffirmed that they're in it for the long haul. The farmers' protest will continue until the government of India listens to our demands. The struggle for India's independence continued for 90 years, so I have no idea how long this protest will go on. The farmers' protests have turned into one of the biggest challenges for Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government. They started last November after Modi rushed 3 agricultural reform bills through Parliament. The new laws allow farmers to sell their produce directly to buyers, rather than going through government-regulated wholesale markets. The government says this will liberalise trade and help farmers get better prices, but protesters fear the laws will leave them at the mercy of big corporations. Several rounds of consultations between farmers' representatives and government officials failed to resolve the standoff. Farming is a huge industry that sustains almost half of India's 1.3 billion people. But protesters here say the new laws will have an impact far beyond the agricultural sector. This fight is not just the fight of the farmers, it is the fight of every common citizen. Because these laws are going to have a direct impact on everyone. The price of grains could become 10 times higher if we don't repeal these laws. So these black laws have to be repealed. This is not just the fight of farmers, but the fight of every Indian. Farmers are united in their resolve. They have vowed to continue their protests until the new legislation is revoked. And soon, the protests could bring the whole country to a standstill. A nationwide strike has been called for the end of September.
DW correspondent Nimisha Jaiswal has been monitoring the story from Delhi. She joins me on the line now. Nimisha, farmers have been striking for nearly 10 months now. How much support do they have left amongst the people?
Well, Viresh, if you look at the massive numbers that turned out for the protest meetings that we saw in the state of Uttar Pradesh recently, they definitely have quite a large amount of support. However, a 10-month protest is hard to sustain, and the pictures are quite different when we look at the blockades on the borders of New Delhi, on the highways that lead into the capital. Those numbers have thinned. Now, there have been several reasons why the farmers' movement has not been able to keep up as much momentum as it had early in its run last year. In January, for example, a tractor rally on Republic Day turned violent, which is when the government stopped coming to the negotiating table. And India's massive second wave of coronavirus cases also did no favors to the farmer protests. And that was a period when they had to quiet down because the whole country was in a healthcare crisis. These meetings and these planned blockades now are seen as an attempt to revive that protest, which had slowed down over the last few months.
Speaking about the negotiations, as you correctly point out, the government stopped negotiating after a while after that incident in January. Now, the negotiations before that ran into several rounds and all of them came to naught. I wonder, therefore, if farmers really believe this deadlock can be broken.
Well, while all those earlier negotiations did not yield any concrete results, as you pointed out, Viresh, there is hope that something may as well come out of for future negotiations, because it's not as if the government has not budged at all. The last time there were negotiations in January, the government in fact offered to suspend these laws for 18 months so that they could jointly discuss what could be fixed so that they could be acceptable to the farmers. However, the farmers turned down this request, this offer, because they stand firm on that the only thing they want is the complete rollback of these laws. And they actually do believe, even now, they continue to believe that they can sustain this movement, these protests endlessly, and that the only way that they will back off is if these laws are rolled back. And they do believe that they can achieve those goals by being a thorn in the government side.
Now, how much of a thorn in the government side are they really, particularly when it comes to the government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi?
Well, the coronavirus surges have been a roadblock for the farmers themselves, but there are serious plans on continuing to hassle the current Narendra Modi government at the national level by hitting them in the states which matter to them. For example, these protests that we saw in the state of Uttar Pradesh, now this state is heading to state elections early next year. And these elections are usually looked at as a popular referendum on if the people are standing by the national government's policies and legislations and governance overall. Now, the farmers have promised that they will visit every village, every city to rally up support for the opponents of the party, basically to campaign against the ruling BJP. And they have done this in the state of West Bengal earlier this year as well, which went to state elections, in which the BJP did see a resounding defeat. Now, seeing defeat around the corner in a heartland state like Uttar Pradesh could scare the Bharatiya Janata Party, the Narendra Modi's BJP, to the negotiating table. At least that's what the farmers hope for.
Nimisha Jaiswal in Delhi, thanks very much for that update.